Welcome to the Appiah Counselling podcast, where we explore the questions people generally ask about mental health, relationships, emotions, and personal growth. Today's question is: can people really change? Over the next few minutes, let's explore what psychology tells us, where common misunderstandings come from, and what this might mean in everyday life. It's a question many of us ask at some point. Sometimes it's about someone else. Will my partner ever change? Will my parent ever see things differently? Will my friend stop behaving this way? Other times, the question is much closer to home. Can I change? Will I always react like this? Is this just who I am? The first thing I'd say is this: change isn't a switch, it's a process. And perhaps one of the biggest misunderstandings is that we often expect change to look dramatic. We expect someone to wake up one morning with a completely different personality. In reality, meaningful change is usually quieter than that. Imagine someone who has always avoided difficult conversations. My hand is held high. I used to be one of those people. For years, they stay silent because speaking up feels risky. Once again, I'm raising my hand. Then one day, they finally say how they feel. The conversation doesn't go perfectly. Their voice shakes. They question themselves afterwards. They wonder if they should have stayed quiet. From the outside, it might not look like much has changed, but internally, something important has happened. They've behaved differently. That is where change often begins. Carl Rogers, the psychologist, believed that people have a natural capacity for growth when the conditions are right. Feeling understood, accepted, and psychologically safe creates an environment where change becomes more possible. Notice what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean everyone changes simply because we want them to. That's a very important distinction right there, yeah? It doesn't mean everyone changes simply because we want them to. Many of us spend a lot of time hoping another person will become more patient, more emotionally available, more accountable, more affectionate. Sometimes they do, other times they don't. One of the hardest parts of life is recognizing that we can encourage change, but we cannot force it. I believe some of you, the horse and the river analogy comes to mind. You may have experienced this yourself. Perhaps you've had the same conversation with someone over and over again. Each time they promise, yeah, things will be different. Yeah, I'll make sure I do things differently. For a week or two, they are. Then everything slips back into old habits. That doesn't necessarily mean they were lying. It may simply mean that insight arrived before new habits did. Knowing what needs to change is very different from changing it. Thinking about New Year's resolutions. Most people already know that better sleep, more exercise or a better diet would benefit them. Knowledge isn't usually the problem because they know it. It's the consistency. Psychology tells us that our brains like familiar patterns, comfort zones. The familiar feels efficient, comfortable. Even when a habit isn't particularly helpful, it can still feel comfortable because it's known, yeah, or familiar with it. That's why change often feels awkward before it feels natural. You might notice this if you've ever tried settling healthier boundaries. The first time you say no can feel uncomfortable. You might replay the conversation afterwards. You might even feel guilty. But that discomfort is necessarily a sign you've done anything wrong. Sometimes it's simply a sign you're doing something different. Another thing worth considering is the difference between personality and behavior. People often say they'll never change. But what do they actually mean? Someone may always be naturally quiet, someone may always be outgoing. Those parts of personality often remain fairly consistent. Behavior, however, is much more flexible. A person can learn to communicate more openly. Can become better at listening. They can become better at being more reliable. They can become more aware of how their behavior affects other people. Real change is often less about becoming someone else and more about becoming a healthier version of who you already are. There's another side to this conversation too. Sometimes we become so focused on whether someone else will change that we stop noticing the choices available to us. If you're constantly waiting for another person to behave differently before you allow yourself to move forward, your life can become dependent on a decision that isn't yours to make. That can leave people feeling stuck for years. Perhaps a more helpful question becomes, regardless of whether they change, what choices do I have? That question shifts attention back to something you can influence. And that's often where counseling begins. Not by controlling other people, but by exploring your own responses, your own patterns, and your own possibilities. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one question to reflect on. Is there someone in your life you've been waiting to change? Or is there a change you've quietly been postponing yourself? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.